Hello and welcome. This is Rooflemonger, my friends. Today I'm talking about pro wrestling in the context of fighting games. Because, simply put, pro wrestling has a massive influence on fighting games. There are many hundreds and hundreds of characters throughout all of fighting games, and when it comes to their martial arts style, as you will find that pro wrestling is very much up there in terms of representation. In fact, other than maybe the basic forms of karate, pro wrestling might be the most common fighting style of a fighting game character. Pretty much every single fighting game has some sort of wrestler in one way or another. Now, it could come in the form of the bulky powerhouse, that's definitely well represented, or it could be a speedy luchador. Fighting game wrestlers, male or female, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And well, that's what the video is about, so let's talk about it. Now, first up, fighting game wrestlers are in no way short for inspirations. Absolutely not. But one of the things is there's no kind of Bruce Lee analog, if you will. Various inspirations for a lot of fighting game characters cast a very wide net. It's hardly just the one person versus, well, the Bruce Lee analog, right? There's a lot of fighting games that have the Bruce Lee character, and they're all some shade of Bruce Lee. Either they directly look like him, or maybe they don't directly look like him, but they fight exactly like him. Now, on the flip here, the wrestling fighting game characters have all sorts of inspirations and wildly different movesets versus just, say, the Bruce Lee moveset. Now, sometimes that inspiration can be very loose. Like, the most famous fighting game wrestler has to be Zangief, right? And Zangief is loosely based off a real person. So, Zangief is almost certainly based off of Viktor Zangiev. So, he was a true amateur wrestler, won many accolades in the Soviet Union, but where he comes to play in the fighting game thing is he worked for New Japan Pro Wrestling for a short stint. This introduced him to the Japanese audience, and obviously enough left a bit of an impression to have at least the inspiration of the name. Now, the real-life Viktor Zangiev was not 500 pounds of muscle and couldn't jump 20 feet into the air to pile drive you, right? So that's some artistic license. Now, speaking of, wrestling inspirations, what about Hulk Hogan? Most famous wrestler of all time, can't be denied, right? Now, a lot of people will point to someone like Alex from Street Fighter, and I guess he has some small Hulk Hogan influence. He does recreate the scene with Hugo, who is very much based off of Andre the Giant, the famous WrestleMania 3 showdown, but realistically, Alex doesn't have much Hulk Hogan inspiration versus, say, Muscle Power from World Heroes. Muscle Power is the all-American balding blonde wrestler, and depending on the version you see him in, he also has the handlebar mustache. So he's much more directly analogous to Hulk Hogan than, say, Alex would be. And besides, in a lot of his moves, Alex is leaving the ground and jumping around, right? Hulk Hogan is only jumping if it's to drop the leg. That's it, brother. Speaking of other direct inspirations, we have Big Van Vader. Vader, one of the biggest guys ever in wrestling, and many consider him the best big man in the history of pro wrestling. And he has a direct inspiration in video games and fighting games through Big Bear / Raiden in The King of Fighters. Now, Raiden wears a mask, but even just physique-wise, it's similar to see, the inspiration pulled from Vader. And Big Bear, which is Raiden, but in the Fatal Fury franchise versus the King of Fighters franchise, he does not wear a mask, and you can see Vader's very distinct double mohawk represented there. There are some characters that are basically like a fusion, like Bass Armstrong from Dead or Alive is effectively a fusion of Macho Man and NWO era Hulk Hogan. And there's a lot of characters in fighting games that are inspired by wrestlers, if not directly, physically, in either appearance or in the moveset. Like Ramon from King of Fighters has a pretty decent inspiration from Tiger Mask, a very famous Japanese wrestler. It's even just in the way he moves. Lisa from Dead or Alive, she's a luchador fighter, and one of the more annoying things I always see is everyone says every luchador fighter is, oh, it's Rey Mysterio. And no, it's not always Rey Mysterio. Now, yes, a few. Okay, sure. I'll give you that, right? But for Lisa specifically, she's very much inspired moveset-wise, and some of her costumes by the Ultimo Dragon. Heck, his finishing move, the Ultimo Driver, that's one of her counters in Dead or Alive 4. Some characters are inspired by actions, like King from Tekken. He has the big jaguar mask, sure, and there's a lot of masked wrestlers in wrestling, absolutely. but specifically he seems to take some inspiration from Fray Tormenta, who was a luchador in Mexico, and what he was famous for was running an orphanage. Taking care of orphans has been a very big part of King's story over the years in Tekken, and comes directly from this. And yes, before you say it in the comments, he was also the guy who inspired Nacho Libre. So that is a small look, because there's a lot, but a small look at some of the wrestlers who've inspired various fighting game characters over the years. But there's so much more wrestling DNA in fighting games. Like, how about the idea of bringing in foreign objects? Turns out a chair, for example, makes a pretty fine weapon in a fighting game, right? And you'll find characters like Beowulf from Skullgirls busting out the chairs, also Mika in Street Fighter. Hell, drawing specifically from Pro Wrestling Power, Mika can use a microphone, cut a promo on you, and the longer she cuts a promo, the more she gets buffed. You don't even have to be a wrestling character to use wrestling moves, you can just be a fan, like Angel from King of Fighters. Angel uses both the rock bottom and the people's elbow as part of her moveset. Really nothing else wrestling related, she just thinks those moves are really cool, so she'll bust them out. And now speaking of busting out wrestling stuff, now Ladiva from Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, definitely a wrestler for sure. However, Ladiva is such a wrestling character in her super move, she even busts out the referee. So the referee will count to 3. If for whatever reason the move doesn't kill you, you'll kick out right before the 3 count, but if the move does finish you off, the ref will go for the full 3 count. So it's effectively a situation of you don't even need to know what the life bar is, right? You can just look at the ref. Does the ref count to 3 or doesn't he? If he counts to 3, well, then I guess the round's over. Another part of wrestling DNA that has escaped into fighting games is the alter ego. There's a lot of wrestlers who wrestle under multiple names. Now, it could be for various reasons. Either they're becoming a completely different character, or within the context of the story, they need to pretend they're someone else. But this also goes through fighting games. Like going back to Bass Armstrong from Dead or Alive. If you pick a very specific outfit for him in Dead or Alive 5, he is no longer Bass Armstrong. He becomes Mr. Strong, the luchador. Now, Mr. Strong is the exact same character as Bass Armstrong, to be sure, right? All the exact same moveset, all that. The only thing that changes is the name. But they're committed to the bit enough that when he puts on the lucha mask, he is a different character. And hell, there's a very famous example of exactly that in Tekken. So in Tekken Tag 2, there is a character introduced as JC. JC was a female luchador with a very indiscernible identity, right? Who could possibly guess who JC is? Well, turns out JC is Julia Chang, wrestling under a luchador mask. In the context of Tekken Tag Tournament 2, she's basically just trying to keep her identity hidden, so puts on the mask and is now someone else entirely. In Tekken 7, Julia Chang would later appear as herself, so no longer JC, but she would make a couple references to it here and there. Now, some people even go so far as to allege that in the King of Fighters, that the King of Dinosaurs is somehow related to T-Zoc. Now, personally, I don't see it, right? Yeah, maybe they share a couple moves, sure. But King of Dinosaurs has gone out of the way to say he is not T-Zoc, and in fact that he has killed T-Zoc. The King of Dinosaurs is the most evil heel of all time, and T-Zoc has friended children everywhere, so I think it's just too wild of an attitude shift. And people like Terry Bogard, who call the King of Dinosaurs T-Zoc directly, he's just a dumb mark. Another thing I found fun is when there's actual wrestling rivalries in the fighting games. Like perhaps the most famous one is within Capcom, Mike Hagar, who is technically not a Street Fighter character, but in the Street Fighter universe, and he is feuding with Zangief. Now Zangief, very famous for 2 moves, the spinning pile driver and the spinning lariat. The thing is though, Zangief did not invent the spinning lariat. He actually stole that move from Mike Hagar. I guess you could say in a little bit of professional jealousy, perhaps. And on the flip, in revenge, Mike Hagar stole the pile driver from Zangief. This would also go on to happen in Virtua Fighter and Tekken. So Wolf Hawkfield's signature move is the giant swing. And then afterwards, when Tekken released, because Tekken came out after Virtua Fighter, then their wrestler King also wound up having his signature move be the giant swing. So it's pretty much blatantly stealing his move, but as history would go on, Tekken wound up becoming more popular than Virtua Fighter, and most people associate the giant swing with King now, instead of the guy whose move it actually was. History's fickle like that, I guess. So in the end, this video is just a very small look at just the influence wrestling has had overall on fighting games. I feel like if I were to get fully in-depth, this video would be like multiple hours long. Just suffice to say, wrestling and fighting games go very well together. At the very bare minimum, like most people who are fighting games fans, I feel like you've probably liked wrestling at some point, right? Big, colorful characters with giant personalities. A lot of both genres of entertainment are very similar. Strong enough it can create weird loops, like Bass Armstrong in the Dead or Alive movie was played by Kevin Nash. And that is still weird all these years later. But in the end, I guess I just want to talk a little bit of wrestling, because wrestling's fun. And these days, with AEW going strong, wrestling's as good as it's been in a very long time. So my friends, I guess that's some wrestle talk, and I guess we're at the end of the video. So thank you very much for watching, hope this video has found you well, and go out and play some fighting games.